dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice. You never know if it'll change your life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dungeon Master of None. I'm Dungeon Master Rob, and it's just me today. I'm going to be doing a solo review of Shadowrun, the Sixth World, the 6th edition sourcebook, rulebook for Shadowrun. Both Matt and I have experience with this, but I have run a lot more games and been a GM for this a lot more than he has, and I have way more opinions than he does on Shadowrun, so I'm going to take this one myself. I should warn you that jumping right into Shadowrun is a little bit tricky, and if you're not familiar with the setting, there's kind of a lot going on, but this is one of my favorite systems and settings, and honestly, there's not really any good reason for that, because as you're going to hear as I talk about this book, it's kind of a mess, but I love it, and there are things about it that I feel like can't entirely be replicated in other systems, and there are just things about it that work super well, even if everything else doesn't really work all of that well. So I'll try to go over the basics. There's not any spoilers here. This is a rule book, so you don't have to worry about that. If you were, if you're familiar with Shadowrun, if you've played it before, and you haven't picked this up yet, hopefully this will be useful to you. If you haven't played Shadowrun at all, Matt and I have talked about it a little bit before, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about it. So hopefully this will be of some use to you. So basically what Shadowrun 6th World is like I said, it's the 6th edition of Shadowrun, a cyberpunk kind of game that dates from the 80s and has gone through a lot of editions and publishers. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about that, because there's actually some very exciting game world drama that I would like to talk about with Matt. But just know that this has not been in the same hands of the same people. It is now owned by Catalyst Game Labs, the same people who own and run the BattleTech intellectual property. And the name of this book is a little bit confusing, because the 6th World is actually the name of the setting of Shadowrun, the sort of building on sort of like indigenous myths of different iterations of the world, right? The 6th World is magic has returned and awakened certain people to the existence of that magic. So I think probably the intent when the developers were deciding what to name this, and I think ambitiously they hoped that this would sort of become the definitive edition, the 6th World edition of Shadowrun, and something that everybody would finally settle on. I'm going to go into more detail, but I want to say that pretty definitively, they failed in every conceivable way, to be honest. This book is a catastrophe in all sorts of ways. It is deeply unpopular with the dwindling hardcore player base. It lacks basic functions of editing and playtesting, and the art's okay. There are good ideas here, but this is honestly, like, as a fan of the system, this is just like an incredible disappointment. 5th edition and 4th, honestly, every edition of Shadowrun has been, in one way or another, kind of a bit of a mess. All of the publishers, but especially Catalyst, have a reputation for, not the best editing work, not the closest attention to detail. And even though 5th edition Shadowrun worked pretty well, it had a lot of problems, and that's the one that I played the most of. And so I was really hoping that 6th edition would come out and they would put the effort and the time and the the focus and energy into it to make this as good as we all hope that it would be, right? Shadowrun is not a thriving community, despite being one of the sort of flagship, one of the oldest RPG properties, one that's been around for a while and has recognizable name. There've been multiple video games. Despite the fact that this is a really valuable intellectual property, the RPG itself is just struggling. And the sales for this book are pretty discouraging. It does not appear to have done very well. Very few people are playing it on Roll20. It's hard to know exactly what the numbers are without any of these companies releasing their internal information. But all signs indicate that Shadowrun: The Sixth World is kind of a dud. That it didn't do very well, and that sometimes there's a disconnect between these two things. But if you go online and see what people are saying about this book, it is overwhelmingly negative. And the few dwindling, sad, isolated, holdout communities of Shadowrun players, all of them generally dislike this book, and they have very good reasons for doing so. But let's talk about what's in this and what's what value it might have and what you might be interested in. And I'll try to talk about how it differs from and how it compares to the previous edition books that I am familiar with. So without further ado, let's talk about what's in Shadowrun: The Sixth World. So this is a core rulebook. It has theoretically everything that you need to play in and run a Shadowrun game. And the thing about Shadowrun, right, the thing that commends it, the thing that makes it unique and notable, is that it combines magic, regular old combat, hacking, and, cyberpunk dystopia type of stuff. And there are other games that do a significant combination of that. So Cyberpunk 2020, which Matt and I are going to talk about at some point, has a pretty good combination of cyberpunk and hacking and real-life combat. And there are some pretty good Powered by the Apocalypse and Savage Worlds adaptations of this sort of thing, but none that really combine magic and technology quite as interestingly as Shadowrun does. So the core part of this book is learning how to run a Shadowrun game, and that starts with building your characters. And so if you're not familiar with the Shadowrun universe, sort of the central conceit is that magic returned to the world in the 2010s, 2020s. Obviously, we have split into a separate timeline now. And there are now elves and orcs and trolls and also fairies and vampires and all sorts of things. And these are called meta-humans. And there's also magic that allows you to just do regular magic things like cast spells and conjure spirits and also enhance your body to be more powerful, but also sort of like weird middle ground magic, be a technomancer, use your resonance brain powers to infiltrate and operate in the Matrix, which is exactly what it sounds like, sort of the big super internet that everybody operates in the Sixth World. And so the core of the book, right, is, the entire book is taken up with basically these concepts, right? Your three or four like basic roles and ideas, which are combat, magic, matrix, and rigging, which is controlling robots and drones and driving and things like that. It's all very cool, but none of this is new to Sixth World. So like, what's different, right, from what does this offer that's new compared to 5th edition? So I will talk about what each of these sort of means in context a little bit in detail. But if you're familiar, here's what has changed. Shadowrun 6th edition has added something called, or has expanded on Edge. Edge was always a stat, or has been a stat in Shadowrun for a while, and it's sort of just like meant to simulate luck or extra ability or something, and allows you to reroll and adjust things. It's sort of like a meta currency like Benny's in Savage Worlds, but it was pretty limited in previous editions, and 6th edition really like takes it to an entirely new level. And I think the intent here was to make it, I mean, you can gain it in this edition by literally having an advantage over your opponent, like being able to see in the dark when they can't, having substantially better gear than they do. So it was meant to, at least in part, work like advantage disadvantage does in 5th edition D&D, but it also does like a whole bunch of other things, and it's still sort of like a core stat that core attribute that every character has. And it tries to do too many things at once, and it's really poorly balanced. But I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. This book also simplified weapon stats, combining a couple of the rules for weapons in previous editions involved lots of calculations for armor penetration and recoil and something like that, and this was combined into attack rating, which by itself is not a bad idea, except that it's really like deeply abstracted. Attack rating mostly relates to your opponent's armor and doesn't really help when it comes to hitting or doing damage. It's mostly about gaining edge, which would be fine and make sense if that's like, I don't know. It doesn't really work, and part of that is why it's just like really poorly balanced. In some ways they tried to simplify this to streamline it a little bit like Wizards did with 5th edition, and they just fell short. Things that they also simplified skills, which was desperately needed. I won't have time to go into the mess of skills in 5th edition and previous Shadowrun editions, but let's just say there are a lot of them, and it's hard to keep track of. This is a major improvement over previous editions. They also, 6th edition also changes the way that armor works. It's no longer rolled as part of your soak test or damage resistance test, and this is dumb and bad because it basically means that armor does nothing except change whether or not you gain edge. So a troll wearing like full plate armor and a elf in a bikini, the armor does basically the exact same thing for them, except that if they're facing off, the troll will receive an edge, and that is not enough to. You can use that edge on certain things, but it's definitely not enough to sort of like properly simulate the difference in combat ability between or combat advantage. In previous editions, you would roll your armor amount to soak damage. It was a lot of rolling, but it made sense. And they haven't really even reduced the roll because you still roll body for your damage resistance test. This is incomprehensible to me. They eliminated limits, which is a good thing. They were designed to sort of stop you from getting. You can throw a whole bunch of dice in Shadowrun. That's sort of the point of this, and this is a major improvement, but it boy, this is a mess. Simplified the action structure. This is good. Actions were very complex in 5th edition, and it wasn't a huge deal, but this is an improvement. They changed the way that spells worked, and the main thing, and if you've been listening and you have no idea what I'm talking about, sorry, I'll get into the specifics a little bit, talk about what's actually in it in a minute. But if you're if you're listening and you're an experienced Shadowrunner, the one thing that I would say that is a real improvement that is worth digging into this book for is they changed the functions of matrix attributes, and they changed how matrix combat works. It's a lot easier. It takes fewer steps. It's just this is one of the areas where I think this book actually improved on the previous ones, and it's sort of a disappointment that the rest of it is such a mess. So those are sort of like the critical differences. And if you're coming here knowing about Shadowrun, hopefully that's helpful. I apologize if you have no idea what I'm talking about. I wanted to get those out of the way because I think that's important to talk about. I'm going to talk about what's generally in the book for the rest of the time. So the book serves both as sort of an introduction to the world. It's got a little bit of fiction and a little bit of a description about how you came to be, about the Awakened, which leads into your character creation. It talks about the Big Ten corporations. This is, these are the corporations in Shadowrun are essentially small governments unto themselves. In fact, the governments are not very important at all. A lot of people, most people, are technically citizens or workers for one of these corporations, and they are sort of the drivers of all of the action in the world. But if you want like a deep lore and deep introduction into Shadowrun and how it works, you're going to have to dig into some of the older books, older novels, source material, and that's okay. That's fine. That stuff all still holds up. But it tries to tell you what there is to know about the world, and it does a pretty okay job. But there's, at this point, just like way too much to cover. Every time they put out a new edition, there's like sort of an advancement to the meta plot, which sometimes is cool in the case of something like Crash 2.0, which explains why the Matrix went from being something you had to plug into to something that it worked wirelessly. But the most recent one is that there was an onset of something called cognitive fragmentation disorder, where AIs used nanotech hives and other things to take over people's bodies. That's pretty cool. It's interesting stuff, but there's just like an awful lot going on, and it's hard to keep track of. And the world moves at a breakneck pace. So you get a little bit of an introduction. You get a intro into game concepts and the core game concept. And if you listen to our previous Shadowrun episodes, you'll know this. And apologies if you don't, and I just babbled for 15 minutes about things you don't understand. But you basically roll a bunch of D6s. And the fun thing about Shadowrun is that you get a bunch of dice together and you roll. And you are trying to get, this is a test, and you're trying to get a certain number of hits, and a hit is a 5 or a 6 on the die, and it's that simple. So at the core of Shadowrun is trying to get as many dice together as possible so that you can guarantee the highest number of hits. And almost every roll is a combination of one of your attributes: body, agility, reaction, strength, willpower, logic, intuition, charisma, plus a skill, of which there are many. Like I said, in previous editions, actions and initiative worked a little bit differently. If there were a certain number of initiative passes, so you would subtract 10 from your initiative count every time you acted, and this meant that some characters could act multiple times before others got to go, since you could be rolling quite a lot of dice for your initiative. This was fun, but ended up being a lot of housekeeping and paperwork, so I'm glad they removed it. It's now just got major and minor actions like a lot of other games. It's simplified and doesn't 100% work, but also the previous initiative rules didn't 100% work either. And the sort of things that you could do with those actions are exactly what you would think you could do: shoot, run, drive something, hack something, cast a spell, etc., etc. It's all very, very straightforward. There's just like a whole bunch of corner case rules. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because this is the section on edge, and edge allows all sorts of things. There are edge actions that cost up to 5 edge, and some of them are pretty straightforward, like you reroll a die or add to your initiative score. You can buy a hit if you really, really want to make sure that you land something. But then it gets a little bit more interesting with something like anticipation, which is when you're performing a multiple attack, you can roll your full dice pool for each target, which means that you can fire at as many people as there are in your field of view. And I just feel like this is not super well thought out, and a lot of people on Shadowrun forums have gamed out how somebody can unload multiple clips before anybody else has a chance to even think about acting, which is super cool. But this is actually not very hard to get, and there are a lot of ways that you can game the system to get edge. This is just desperately needed playtesting, and I could go into all sorts of things. There are good ideas here, like allowing you to do called shots and make a big speech. And, again, the idea of like a meta currency that allows you to do interesting things is common throughout a lot of games. It's very cool. This is just really poorly implemented. It's just very, very frustrating. So 6th edition also adds a bunch of statuses, again, sort of moving in the direction of 5th edition, having conditions that are triggered or countered by specific things. It's a little video gamey, but I think this makes a lot of sense, and I don't mind that tabletop RPGs are moving in this direction. And if I were going to borrow something from 6th edition, this is definitely something that I would do. Next up is the section on character creation. You have all of your dwarfs, elves, orcs, humans, trolls, etc. Your lifestyle, living on the street all the way up through luxury. You're encouraged to pick a role: arcane specialist, face, somebody who talks, street samurai, tech specialist, a decker or a rigger. And it, walks you through it, and this is fine. The way that character creation works in Shadowrun is you've got priority. So you pick sort of a lump of abilities, or you pick your priorities, right? If you want your priority A to be attributes, you get more of those. B, Nuyen, money. It's not like the worst way to do character creation. It ends up being more confusing than I think it is intended to be. You could also just do character creation with karma, which is sort of the leveling, leveling resource, a little bit like XP, but you don't level up. You just can spend it after each session if you have enough on things that you need. This is no different from any of the previous editions. I'm just letting you know that it's still kind of a mess, and this didn't really fix it. It tried, but it didn't succeed. And then the qualities are perks and negatives. These are a little bit better implemented than in 5th edition. Still a lot of ways to break them, especially when it comes to qualities that add edge. As an example, one is called Analytical Mind, which gives you a bonus edge whenever you make a logic-based test, which includes most matrix actions, which you can sort of do at will. So just reading this, I'm not seeing how a player couldn't just make a bunch of logic tests, bank up edge, and then unload it with one of the poorly balanced edge actions, but whatever. There's a few character archetypes included as an example. I only mention this because whoever designed these or wrote the book clearly did it at a different point than when the book was finished, because a lot of the numbers are wrong and a lot of these archetypes can't be made or are weak or wrong. It's just a mess. You know, these are designed to sort of be your iconics, or like at least like a model for you to build your character concepts off of, and they function very poorly as that. You've then got your skills, which is the core part of the game. All sorts of things. Everything is included in a skill, everything from decking all the way to combat. This is fine. Next up is magic. The magic section is fine. They have changed the way that spells work. It's a little bit more streamlined, but unfortunately, because of the way that they sort of broke armor, it doesn't feel good to use this, because it doesn't feel good to use the combat and armor rules. Also, magic includes all sorts of different focuses, conjuring and regular combat magic, as well as enchanting, alchemy, and artificery. And I'm fairly certain that the artificing and enchanting sections were literally copy pasted from 5th edition. It does not seem like they felt it was worth updating these at all. And that's a bummer. Next up is the Matrix section, which, like I mentioned, I think is a major improvement. Previously, you had to put marks on a host and go through a bunch of steps, all sorts of rules to do anything in the Matrix. You still have to do some of that, but it's streamlined. It's still too complicated, but it's probably the least complicated it's been in a few editions. So I really like this. I wish that the rest of the book worked so that you could use the Matrix rules. It tries to simplify it. And it's a moderate success. The section on rigging, and rigging is sort of like a catch-all term for controlling drones and robots and vehicles, and it has a little bit of overlap with decking, and involves sort of, usually you're jumped into something through the Matrix and you're trying to control multiple stuff at a time. It's cool. It's fun. This is about the same as 5th edition, except that a lot of the rules have not been play tested all that well, and the stats for the vehicles and the drones are sort of all over the place. If this were any less complicated than 5th edition, it might be worth using, but it's not, so I would not use it. And then the rest of the book is sort of GM advice. It's almost like not even worth saying, but there's basically no like GM advice at all. There's a bunch of stuff here, but it which the GM needs to know, but there's not really any section that tells you how to run a game. And if I thought they were going to release a GM's guide, I might not complain about that, but I don't think that they are. And, given that there's like 2 pages on the rules for shooting a gun through a wall, it seems like just like a major oversight to not put anything here. Like, I'm already like burned out and sad talking about all the things that like it did poorly, but the whole section on running the game is just like, it's a ton. I mean, there's pages and pages on like security ratings and like locks and things, which is important, but like it doesn't actually tell you how to run a game. There's no you just have to do like a ton of legwork. The best and most exciting part of the Shadowrun book is at the end. It's the gear section. This is just as good as any of the others. Again, the major problem is that because of the way that they changed weapons and armor, I can't even see how this matters. The fact that a lot of it mostly is just about gaining edge really makes it feel not very rewarding. And even though previous editions are crunchier and a little bit more complicated, I would still probably prefer to use them because it feels like what you're doing actually matters. So, if you made it this far into the book, I mean, there's good stuff here, but like all of the good equipment is in the older books, and so this can sort of like safely be ignored. And that's it. That's what's in Shadowrun Sixth World. It's fine for core rulebook. It's a bummer because 5th edition and previous editions have tons and tons of cool splat books with a lot of extra options in them, which you either have to now convert or wait for an update for. And this is, the risk of any new edition, but it does not feel like this one earned it. If this had done what it set out to do, it would still only really be Shadowrun 5.5. There's not really enough here, in my opinion, to justify a new edition. They didn't really implement enough new ideas and new systems, but even the ones they did implement don't really work. And it's hard for me to say whether or not better editing would have saved this book, because a major problem is that it's clearly not play tested. It's really poorly edited. There's contradictory rules everywhere. There's a section in the book that literally says "Argle Bargle Foofara," about some aspect of the rules, and it's not clear whether that's meant to be there or if that's literally just like something the writer put down as a placeholder and they didn't take it out. And there's a lot of stuff like that in this book. And, this gets into sort of the major failings of Catalyst as a company. They're allegedly run by an actual embezzler that took money from one of the previous, from their bank account, basically, to finance an addition to their house. They don't pay their freelancers very well. There's all sorts of mismanagement and just sort of like a disinterest in the game and in the system and in the players. And I love this system and I love this game, and so I want it to work, and so I'm always trying to be charitable. But it just does not feel like this felt rushed. It does not feel like it was play tested at all. It does not feel like it was thought through. It's parts of it were absolutely just copy pasted. It's a major disappointment, and it's kind of like an insult to the players. And my advice to you is that even if you're a Shadowrun fan, that you not buy this. I hate like feeling left behind. I love a shiny new book, but I can't recommend that you give any money to Catalyst, and you're not going to really find anything all that good here. If you're not a Shadowrun player and for some reason you have listened to me ramble about it all this long, there are a lot of really good adaptations. There's In the Sprawl, and there's a Savage Worlds version, and there's a Genesis version of Shadowrun. And if you like the idea of the setting and you think the setting is cool, which it is, and you're not familiar with the Shadowrun like game rules, I wouldn't bother at this point. I really hope that at some point somebody can rescue this from Catalyst, because I love throwing big handfuls of dice, and this is a system that does it really well, but just the bare minimum of making sure that it makes sense and that it works and that it is edited and that just sort of somebody has tried to make this system functional is just not here. And that makes it really hard to recommend, which is really it's disappointing to me, because I would love to recommend it. And I am going to run my own game in sort of like a hybrid of 5th edition and 6th edition soon, but that's only really possible because I have spent so much time with the rules already, and I cannot in good conscience recommend that anybody who doesn't really love the system and hasn't already shelled out for this book buy it. So I know that was kind of rambly, and I know that it wasn't particularly helpful. I would have liked to be able to give you like a better recommendation, but I needed to talk about what was in this and discuss why it was bad and be honest about it. I know Matt and I have definitely reviewed not great books before, but I sat on this one for so long because it is just such a mess and I don't have a lot good to say about it. So the Matrix rules, like I said, I like the way that they changed initiative and the action economy, but the rest of it is a disaster. You have to do so much homebrewing. I absolutely cannot recommend that anybody pick up this book and run a game in Shadowrun 6th edition. So that's my review of Shadowrun 6th World. I would like to talk about some of the adaptations at some point, about the Genesis or about In the Sprawl, and hopefully I will. If you made it this far and you're a Shadowrun fan, pour one out, chummer, and let's hope that, Catalyst goes under, gives this over to somebody else. I don't know what would be good. But, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.